People in modern cities spend hundreds of dollars every year trying to solve problems that farmers in rural China solved with materials they already had lying around. Not through luck, not through accident, but through observation, repetition, and the kind of pressure that forces you to find answers when there is no store, no delivery, and no way to call someone for help. That knowledge is still available to you. It is sitting there, waiting, in the specific techniques that kept entire families alive through seasons when food was scarce, homes were hard to heat, and waste was not an option but a catastrophe. The farmer in Hunan province who needed to preserve the summer harvest for winter without a freezer did not consider it a problem to be solved with electricity. He solved it with what he could see and touch. The family in the mountains of Guizhou that faced brutal cold without central heating did not wait for technology. They engineered their own thermal envelope using materials that cost almost nothing. These were not primitive workarounds. They were sophisticated solutions born from generations of necessity, tested across centuries, and they work as well today as they did 300 years ago. The only thing that has changed is that most of you have forgotten they exist. The first technique is salt preservation for eggs, and it is one of the most elegant solutions to a specific problem in food storage. In rural Anhui province, farmers developed this method to preserve the nutrient density of eggs through the months when hens stop laying. You take chicken or duck eggs, coat them completely in a thick paste made from salt, clay, and water, until no surface of the shell is visible. The salt draws moisture out of the egg through osmosis. This dehydration creates an environment where bacteria cannot thrive. Store these coated eggs in a cool, dark place on a bed of straw or sawdust, and they will last for 3 to 4 months without any refrigeration. The chemistry is direct. Salt is a desiccant and a natural preservative. The clay acts as a seal. The combination stops decomposition at the cellular level. Rural families relied on this through winter when fresh eggs were impossible to find, and it meant the difference between adequate nutrition and slow deficiency. The second technique is ash storage for vegetables, used in rural Sichuan for generations to extend the season of late harvest crops. When the cooler months arrive but frost has not yet come, you harvest root vegetables and leafy greens and layer them carefully in wooden boxes with wood ash between each layer. The ash absorbs excess moisture, which would otherwise cause rot. It also raises the pH around the vegetables, making the environment hostile to the fungi that cause spoilage. A box layered this way will keep carrots, turnips, Chinese cabbages, and leafy greens fresh and crisp for 2 to 3 months in a cool storage room. The mechanism is straightforward biology. Fungi need moisture and specific pH levels. Remove the moisture and adjust the chemistry and the decomposition simply stops. Families in rural Sichuan use this to bridge the gap between late harvest and spring, ensuring that stored vegetables remained edible and safe well into winter and early spring. The third technique is paper window insulation for cold climates, practiced in traditional rural households across northern China where winter temperatures drop far below freezing and fuel for heating is precious. You layer thin rice paper or mulberry paper across the interior of wooden window frames, sealing it with a paste made from flour and water. This creates a dead air space between the paper and the glass. Air is an insulator. The paper itself adds resistance to heat transfer. When you layer this properly, you reduce heat loss through windows by approximately 30 to 40%, which in a room heated by a single stove makes an enormous difference in fuel consumption. The physics is the same principle that modern double-pane windows use, except executed with materials a rural family could produce themselves. Families in Shanxi province use this method to reduce the amount of wood or coal needed to survive winter, an outcome that directly affected survival when fuel was rationed or scarce. The fourth technique is fermented vegetable brine as a preservation system and a flavor amplifier, developed across rural Fujian province where fresh vegetables were seasonal, but fermentation could extend their life indefinitely. You fill a ceramic crock with fresh vegetables, cabbage, mustard greens, radish, turnip, and submerge them completely in a salt brine at a ratio of 5% salt by weight of the vegetables. The salt draws out the vegetable's own water through osmosis, creating a liquid that keeps them submerged. Anaerobic bacteria in the brine ferment the vegetables over 2 to 3 weeks. This fermentation produces lactic acid, which lowers the pH below the threshold where harmful bacteria can survive. The result is vegetables that stay safe, develop complex flavors, and improve in texture and digestibility over months or even years. The mechanism is microbial. Lactobacillus species outcompete pathogens by acidifying the environment. The vegetables do not spoil because the environment becomes actively hostile to the organisms that cause spoilage. Families throughout rural Fujian used fermented vegetables as a dietary staple year-round, ensuring consistent access to vegetables in preserved form when fresh food was unavailable. The fifth technique is lime treatment for corn storage, a method used in rural Mexico and rural China alike, applied across generations in provinces like Yunnan and Guizhou. When corn is dried and stored, weevils and other insects can infest the grain. You add hydrated lime at a ratio of 1 part lime to 100 parts corn by weight. The lime raises the pH of the grain, making it inhospitable to insect larvae. It also has a mild desiccating effect that prevents moisture accumulation. The corn remains edible and the insects do not develop. This technique kept stores of corn viable for years, making it possible to build up reserves that could carry a family through lean seasons or poor harvests. The mechanism is chemical. Insects have specific pH requirements for development. Raise the pH and shift the chemistry, and the environment becomes unsuitable for their life cycle. Rural families in mountain provinces used this to store the primary caloric staple, ensuring that hunger in one year did not mean starvation in the next. The sixth technique is charcoal activation for water storage in areas where clean water sources are intermittent or seasonal. In rural households across Hunan and Jiangxi provinces, families would prepare charcoal by burning wood in a low-oxygen environment, then place the activated charcoal in fabric-lined earthenware vessels. Water poured through this charcoal loses most of its suspended particles and many of its chemical contaminants. The charcoal acts as a physical and chemical filter. Pour water through, and the porous structure of the charcoal traps particles, while certain compounds bind to the charcoal's surface. The result is water that is safer to drink and stores longer without acquiring off flavors. The mechanism is adsorption. The charcoal's surface area is enormous at the microscopic level, creating space for contaminants to bind. Families in water-insecure regions use this to make stored water safer and more stable, extending the utility of water collected during the rainy season for use through the dry months. The seventh and final technique is radiant heat storage using stone or clay, the most sophisticated thermal engineering developed by rural families in the coldest mountain regions of China. In a traditional room, you place large stones or fire bricks in the path of direct sunlight during the day. These materials have high thermal mass, meaning they absorb and store a great deal of heat energy. As the sun moves and the room cools, the stones slowly release that stored heat throughout the evening and night, maintaining a more stable temperature than the room would maintain on its own. In some versions, families built small stone or ceramic platforms called kang in sleeping areas, positioned to catch the warmth of cooking fires and morning sun. The physics is thermodynamic. Materials with high specific heat capacity require a lot of energy to change temperature, which means they resist temperature fluctuations. Stone has roughly twice the specific heat of wood or fabric. Position it correctly, and it becomes a passive thermal battery, storing warmth during the day and releasing it when the environment grows cold. Families in the Tibetan Plateau and in mountain villages of Yunnan and Qinghai use this principle to reduce fuel consumption by 30 to 50%, a difference that directly determined whether a family could survive a winter where fuel was strictly limited. What connects all 7 of these techniques is that none of them work by fighting against the basic physics and chemistry of the world. They all work by understanding those principles clearly and then working with them instead of against them. The farmer using salt to preserve eggs is not trying to invent refrigeration. He is using osmosis. The family using fermentation is not trying to invent modern canning. They are understanding that certain bacteria create an environment hostile to dangerous bacteria and simply letting that process happen. The person storing charcoal in water is not trying to invent industrial filtration. They are understanding that certain materials have the capacity to trap particles and choosing to let nature do the work. This is the operating principle of practical knowledge in cultures that cannot afford waste or failure. Do not try to control the system. Understand the system and position yourself with it. The technique that might surprise you most is the one that appears simplest. It is the practice of keeping seeds viable through seasons of storage, using sand and moisture control, applied in rural Sichuan and Yunnan, where seeds were far too valuable to lose to germination or rot. You take cleaned seeds and layer them in sand that has been dried slightly in the sun. The sand insulates the seeds from temperature fluctuations. It prevents them from absorbing excess moisture, which would trigger germination. It also prevents them from drying out completely, which would kill the embryo. The result is seeds that remain viable for 3 to 5 years, under conditions that would cause them to germinate, rot, or simply die under less precise storage. The mechanism combines multiple principles. Sand is an insulator and a moisture buffer. It moderates environmental extremes. Seeds stored this way maintain dormancy precisely because the environment is stable enough that germination triggers do not activate. Rural families use this to maintain genetic continuity across years, ensuring that if a particular crop variety thrived in their specific soil and climate, they could keep growing it instead of being dependent on whatever seeds merchants happen to have in stock. Start today with one of these 7. Pick the one that addresses a problem you recognize in your own life. If you are frustrated with how quickly vegetables spoil, buy a ceramic crock if you have access to one, or use a clean glass jar, and start a small fermentation with salt brine and whatever greens you have available. If you want to reduce the heat loss in your home during the months when heating matters, paper your windows using rice paper and flour paste. If you are uncomfortable with how dependent you are on constant refrigeration, and you want a backup system that requires nothing but salt and clay, use your next dozen eggs to test the salt preservation method. What these families understood was that the systems we depend on are fragile in ways we do not usually notice until they are not there. What they proved was that there are solutions that do not depend on those systems at all.